beautiful bridge of ice. But think about how thick that ice is. That's about 3-4 feet thick right there. That thick hunk of ice, as it goes down the river, will look for a snag. Before you know it, there's an ice dam. So it's really beautiful to see this stuff, but at the same time, you really have to be aware of the danger that a frozen river has to your home or to low-lying human settlements. This is the Eastern States Exposition Grounds in West Springfield, Massachusetts. You can see the Monarch Building and maybe the top of Bay State West over the Better Living Center there. And there's the Brooks Building here where the Brain Control Center of the Big E is. And all around are buildings that were here back in 1936, but none of those buildings has a more proud story than the Coliseum, the largest building in Western Massachusetts at the time of the 1936 flood. Here we can see above me on this brass plaque the high water mark of the 1936 flood here at the Eastern States Exposition. They remember their history here, but here in West Springfield, Massachusetts, which gives you a sense about the inundation, the biblical scale of this flood. St. Patty's Day, 1936. So we're in Holyoke, Mass, on the bridge between the Paper City and South Hadley. And we can see the Connecticut River is substantively ice-locked in this area. And up above, we can see that above the dam, the Connecticut River Reservoir there, the South Hadley Reservoir, whatever the reservoir they created back in 1849 is called, that reservoir is solid ice, and ice extends up the river all the way to Northampton. And in some cases, because this is river ice, we're talking about very thick ice. And back in 1936, this area was the scene of a massive ice jam. And that ice jam, and another one like it down in Windsor Locks, Connecticut, would cause quite a catastrophe for the Pioneer Valley. So what we're going to do is check out the 1936 flood in this episode of Fishing Historic Places. New Englanders have always been concerned with climate fluctuations and weather fluctuations. Of course, with that old New England adage being, if you don't like the weather here, wait 5 minutes. However, the winter of 1935-36 was a particularly cold one, even by New England standards, with the rivers of the region being locked in thick ice. Now, the 36 flood was a northeast phenomena that basically extended all the way down to Washington, D.C. But what we're going to focus on in this video is the events in and around the Connecticut River Valley in western Massachusetts. At the time, Springfield was the second largest city in the state of Massachusetts, with its economy focused on armaments centered on the Springfield Armory, but other armaments factories were spread up and down the valley along the Connecticut River into Connecticut. Friends of mine that are into fly fishing understand what CFS means. And if you take a look at this chart, you're going to see what's coming to the Pioneer Valley and below as the rivers are going to reach record flood stages here in 1936. Now, the flood began up in New Hampshire and Vermont with the rainwaters plunging down the Green and the White Mountains and entering the Connecticut River, which immediately began to break up, sending blocks of ice as big as automobiles down the river, compromising several bridges and ultimately resting on the Vernon Dam, where a gigantic ice dam developed, leading to curiosity seekers heading out to check it out. This was basically a fairy tale, a winter wonderland, if you will, the ice in all of its colors stacked up in this massive dam. But it wasn't to remain there. By the time the ice dam had reached 19 feet above the Vernon Dam, everything let loose, and that flood came crashing down the upper Connecticut River in Massachusetts, being the largest floodwaters ever seen on the Turner's Falls Dam, just pictured. It quickly found itself contained again, however, as a second ice dam developed above Holyoke, Massachusetts, where the river narrows by Mount Tom and Mount Holyoke. This caused the river to back up, flooding Hadley, Northampton, and Hatfield, and caused more looky-loos to come down and check out the river and the awesome ice dam, and led others, people that were a little concerned about what might happen, to consider trying to remove the dam before it got too big by blowing it up with dynamite. None of this really worked too well, and ultimately the dam gave way in a crash that was heard miles and miles away, and that ice tumbled down the Connecticut River, compromising the Holyoke Dam's eastern side and wearing a channel 1,000 feet long around the dam's eastern side. The water then came to rest again, with another ice dam forming down in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. And this dam would be 45 feet deep, resting on the bottom of the bed of the river. And slowly, once again, the cold flood waters rose, and the city of Springfield, Mass. Found itself underwater. Now, when that initial ice jam came rushing down the river, it had come up against the breakwater or dike that guarded West Springfield's low-lying eastern side from the floods of the Connecticut River. I mean, from way back in colonial history, the native people had told the Springfield settlement, don't settle on the west side of the river, it floods. Well, the dike that was protecting the west side of the river was compromised, and in came the water. On the Springfield side, the Springfield PD and the Springfield Fire Department went out to try to do what they could. Cathedral High School was used as a emergency shelter, as were many other buildings, and this wasn't funny anymore. People were dying and property was being destroyed. The Mass State Police came to dinner to try to help in their awesome, questionably inspired uniforms, and there just weren't enough of them, so they brought in the National Guard because, of course, looting broke out. It had done so already in Northampton, and it would do so in Springfield, although we don't hear about it in West Springfield, where people were too busy running up the western hills to get away from the floodwater. People would later remark how crazy it was to see neighbors dragging suitcases and 5-year-olds up the side of Tubbs Hill to get away from the frigid waters. Now, West Springfield is home to the Eastern States Exposition, the Big E, New England's largest farm fair, and you could recognize below some of the sites of the Big E today: the Better Living Center, the Coliseum, the state buildings, all underwater here. Even Loomis Chaffee, a private school in Windsor, Connecticut, suffered from the flood. More than 200 people lost their lives, and $40 billion in today's money was lost as a result of this ice-inspired flood. 1936 was an election year, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to get New England's votes and stepped up with the Flood Control Act of 1936, designating the Army Corps of Engineers as the federal agency that would protect the country from floods. They would go ahead and quickly begin a program of building dams, dikes, and other flood control infrastructure that protects our region even to this day. We're talking about miles of river that are predominantly ice-locked right now. And a little community like this, you can see the river meanders. And with this meander here, all it takes is a fallen tree, a sandbar, a gravel bar, a couple of boulders during that first warm period when they're tumbling down the river to catch. When they catch, they can very quickly, within minutes, form a dam that can flood out a little community like this. And this actually is, communities go up here isn't that little. But it's not just communities like Chester that have to worry. It's our valley communities along the Connecticut River. And we have historical evidence that shows us the power of an ice dam and the ensuing floods that result.